Hi, my name is Leanne Gibbs from Early Start. Welcome to the final webinar for 2020 from Early Start at the University of Wollongong, restoring a sense of safety, supporting children, families and communities in times of crisis. On the 18th of July 2019, a fire began burning in a dry swamp in Port Macquarie and threatened homes in the local area. This fire burned until the 12th of February in 2020. This first fire marked the start of a devastating series of fires that burnt the east coast of Australia, wreaking havoc on the natural environment, affecting property and displacing people within many locations. This traumatic event has brought into sharp focus how climate change impacts the natural environment, the way we live on the land, and the lives of children and families. Tonight we'll be focusing on the unfolding effects of the 2020 bushfires, specifically their impact on communities and how we can restore a sense of safety following a traumatic climate-related disaster. We will hear from three people with three different perspectives on the fires: Kim Flint, Cathy Powzun and Mark Donovan. So to the format for tonight. First, Kim sets the scene with a very personal story and an insight into how an early childhood community affected by the fires is impacted. Cathy will reflect on how the New South Wales Department of Education has responded to the fires and how they are supporting children, families and communities. Mark Donovan will then examine the effects of trauma on children and how to restore a sense of safety and security following a traumatic event. Following the presentations, we'll have a conversation with our three presenters, along with Associate Professor Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett. We would love to hear from you, so please put your questions in the question box and we'll ask these of our presenters. We've left plenty of time to respond to you and explore the issues after the presentations. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land with a very special acknowledgement from the children of Kids Uni here at UOW and also Gallagher Preschool.
At Kids Uni, we'd like to say thank you to the Dharawal people for letting us share their words. We promise to look after the land and the animals and the people too. Here is Mother Earth. Here is Grandfather Mountain. Here are my friends. And here am I.
Here is the sky.
Here is the sky.
Here are my friends.
Here are my friends.
And here am I.
Here am I.
We thank the Dungutty people.
We thank the Dungutty people
for the land in which we learn and play.
for the land in which we learn to play.
Hands up.
Hands up.
Hands down.
Hands down.
We're on Dungutty ground.
Dungutty ground.
Get all the grandfather's son. All right. Everyone hands in.
Hands in.
Everyone come in. Everybody put your hands in. Are we going to have a good day?
Yay!
1, 2, 3. Yay!
Now to our first presenter, Kim Flint. Kim is Director of Eden Early Learning Centre on New South Wales South Coast. Kim has been an early childhood educator for many years and leads the team at Eden Early Learning Centre. Kim is also studying for her degree in early childhood education with the University of Wollongong. When the bushfires threatened her local community, Kim found herself in a very unknown and unprecedented predicament. Here she tells us about her experience and about the reshaping of the early childhood education community as a result of the fires.
So all I remember in January when the bushfires happened was it was something that I'd never had to deal with before. So for me, we live on a couple of acres and we have sheep and chickens and ducks and a dog or two and a cat. And it's like, okay, what do we do with all these things? It's just lucky that my partner has trucks for his business, and his business is located on the wharf. So everything was packed into the trucks, and we didn't have a caravan, so we moved into the back of the truck. So did the two dogs and the cat, and the sheep had our names written on them, and that was it. We were ready to go. And it was, my partner was on the roof. He still had the whippersnipper harness. He had the harness on, and he was up with the hose and he was hosing, and the wind started to pick up, and just as the wind picked up, you could see the redness just over the hills from the distance from our house. And I'm looking and I'm like, I'm really starting to worry, but because he was calm, I just had to be calm, because he's calm, I don't need to panic. So I was fine, and we were getting there. But I really just wanted to yell at him and say, we need to go. And I just had to stay calm, because every blade of grass, every leaf was picked up from our property, and you could have put the house on the market. There was nothing out of place. So I have photos, and the sky turned red so quickly. And then by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was black. One of the things I really remember is we only had one way in and out from our property, and it was just lucky that forestry came through and they actually bulldozed a road. So there was a lot of preparation before these fires came, but nobody actually knew how bad they were going to be, because the weather people got it wrong, and then they lost the fires, and there was so much happening. But I remember driving down the road in pitch black, and it was like a volcano had erupted, because the ash was on the windscreen. The cat's next to me, the dog's in the back, and it's so surreal. And then you get down to the wharf, which it was just chaos, because I'm working in the childcare centre. We know where the evacuation centre is, because our evacuation plan is to, we take, with 3 children in the car and take them down to Snug Cove. And so everybody else in Eden knew that that's where we went, but there was so much confusion. There was people everywhere, and the sky was red, and the wind, you couldn't keep your eyes open, and the sky was red, and there was and then there was another evacuation centre, which was at the Fishermen's Club. So there was a lot of confusion of, where do we go? Are we meant to be at the Fishermen's Club? Are we meant to be at the wharf? So it was our choice to stay at the wharf, because my partner had to fuel the police boats, because they were rescuing people from Malakuta. So we had to stay, because he was the man with the fuel truck to fill up the boats. So we stayed. That was our decision. And then there was one time the police turned up, and they were going around. There must have been 500 people still left at the wharf, where they had actually evacuated the whole town by door knocking, because it was coming. And so even the evacuation centre at Eden, at the Fishermen's Club, they had been told to go to Merimbula. They were told to leave. Merimbula's about 20 minutes away. But then the police came thinking that the whole town had been evacuated, and they weren't. There was 500 people still sitting on the wharf. And he spoke to my partner, and he said, what's going on? All these people are still here. And he said, yeah, you can ask them to leave, but I don't think they're going to go anywhere. And nobody did go, because they all had their caravans and their kids. And if it was coming the way that they said it was going to come, we were surrounded by water, and it was as easy as getting into the water. The tugboats were there. They had women and children just loaded into the tugboats. And my thought was of my children who were with their dad. And I tried to call them to see where they were at. And they were at home, and they were sitting down to have dinner. They were saying grace. And we were like, you've got to get out of there. And they're like, no, we're fine. And where they live, if it was coming, it was going to wipe them out. And that's about 15 minutes later, the police were knocking on the door. So they ended up sleeping in Mitre 10 in Bega. So there was a lot. And once you left Eden, you couldn't get back. So you couldn't get back to Eden for a few days. So we stayed in the truck for 2 nights. We went back to the farm on the Sunday, and yeah, so we spent 3 days at the wharf living in a truck and cooking our meals in the ice works, which is where he does all the bags of ice up the coast, where you go and fill your esky with ice, and he fills all the boats up. So yeah, so at 6 o'clock in the morning, it was the sky was bright red, and once there was light, you still couldn't see across the bay. It was just so surreal that we had sat there when, you know, a few weeks after it had happened, the devastation that had happened, and to see the chip mill was on fire, the smoke, and it was just horrific, absolutely horrific. And we could not believe that we had just sat in the car and slept in the truck all night through what had happened. And it was only that the Nullika River stopped, the wind changed, and it didn't jump the Nullika River. If it had jumped the Nullika River, it would have wiped Eden out. So we had one family that attends the centre, so there's 2 children in that family. They lost everything down at Kaya. And then there's 2 staff members, 2 educators that also lost, they lost everything. All their property was wiped out. The children, when we were back, we didn't open the centre. We had to stay closed for a week due to the boil water notice, and the state of the centre. We're right next to the bush, so we had to clean up. We had to come in and clean up. There was ash on every resource outside in the sand pit. It was everywhere. So, and then one of the staff members, she never came back. So our educational leader, she didn't come back because she just lost everything, and that was pretty traumatizing to her, and that's how she dealt with it. Whereas another staff member, she also lost everything, but she came back as well. So people, they just reacted to it differently. And children that hadn't lost anything, you could tell that they'd been around a lot of conversations about fires and loss, because it's what their conversations were. So you think about all these children that had been around adults that were constantly watching Facebook, watching the news, listening to the radio, and these children are hearing on the radio, like for a few days, it was, the fire is here, it's too late to leave, seek shelter. And this is what was being put on the radio. And to hear that is quite traumatizing. I mean, just thinking of those people that they were being told that you can't leave, you have to find shelter now, it's too late to leave. So this was on the radio. So you're actually hearing of other people where the fire was approaching and it's too late, you've got to seek shelter. So, and the children were hearing this as well, and they were in their conversations with educators and with each other. The smoke, it sparked a lot of conversations. And on our first day back, we had a debrief from council on, you know, how we were going to be dealing with families and children. And one was that, you know, we weren't going to have conversations about the bushfires in front of the children, that we were going to let them bring it up. And I think there was a real sense of, we need to get these children back into routine and have the consistency that they know and bring back that sense of belonging. But it ended up being, sense of belonging was also about the staff as well. So especially for the staff member that returned, this was a place that she could come to, and the consistency was here, her friends were here, the relationships were here, and yeah, this became the place where she could find her sense of belonging again, because everything was gone. So our educational leader hadn't returned, so she didn't return until the end of February, and then COVID hit. So that was another big hit for us. But in April, we were able to finally have a professional development day, and that day was to bring the team together as one, and it would have been the same day that any service would have at the beginning of the year. And what's the goals? Where are we going? What direction? Let's fix up our philosophy. Let's do this, let's do that. So in April, we had our day of coming together. We had a child-free day. Children stayed home for the day. It was organised through council, and I prepared a day where it was let's rethink about our roles. Why are we here? And let's have a little bit of fun together. So we did heavy stuff. We spoke about theorists and philosophies and things like that. But we also played pin the tail on the donkey and had quizzes and had a chance to debrief and connect again as a team. And we're still trying to connect together as a team. It's very ongoing. And at the moment, the staff wellbeing has been very important for us this year. With educators away, the other educators are burning out. The consistency within the centre is not the way it should be. The leadership isn't there. So it's really taken a toll on the whole team, and the children and the families as well, because that familiar face isn't here, that they know the programming. It's just affected everything because of the bushfires. It's really impacted a lot of areas that you wouldn't think that it would have impacted. For just recently with the bushfire recovery, there's been a lot of money allocated to mental health. And we just recently, in the last couple of weeks, we partnered with Royal Far West, and Royal Far West did a session with the educators because they asked us, did we want to be a part of their program? And I said yes, and they were coming to the community, so they worked with the school as well, but they wanted to either do a program with the children or the families, and it was suggested that they do their program with us as the educators, because we're central to families and children, and we had staff that were affected by the fires. So we did a Zoom session with Chris, and he's a social worker, and Brianna was an OT. So we did some work with them, and Brianna did a lot around the brain and how the brain reacts, trauma and the brain. So that was really refreshing for the educators to understand how children react to trauma and things like that, so that we're re-identifying with that again. And that, there's always a reason for these behaviours. So, and then I had some staff that were affected that didn't actually confide in me that they found the session a little bit confronting, but it brought them together that they could talk to each other and know that, okay, so this one's not doing so well, this person's not doing so well. And then we had Chris and Brianna come to the centre, and they did a session with us face to face, and it was really good. Everybody got to have a say, and I was actually really surprised because the people that usually go under the radar and don't say much, they've actually found their voice and are speaking and putting more input into conversations around well-being and mental health. So, and it's really good to hear them talk and get their emotions out. And it's now we know each other well, so we know when we're having a bad day. And I had a staff member the other day, I could see she was very quiet, and I said, "You're very quiet," and that was enough for her to just burst into tears. And she did lose everything, and it's only now, like in November, and this happened back in January, she's been a rock all year and would come in and be very excited about, we've got cladding, we've got a frame, our house is being rebuilt. She's been very positive all year. but just this one weekend away with her family, and it brought her undone because she realised the things that she did actually lose, and it's not the materialistic things, it's the memories. She has 4 children, and her son, that bowl and spoon that he had, that he remembers as a child, she lost that. And so this is now coming up and coming out that, yeah, I lost this, and now I really need to deal with this. And once she got that out and we were able to acknowledge that, no, you're not, we know you're not having a good day, she seemed to pick up in herself, because she knows we're here to support her, and she can tell us, I'm not having a very good day today, because it's been that kind of a year that people aren't having a good day. So yeah, and yeah, Royal Far West were really good. And one of the activities we had to do was write a letter to ourselves as a wellbeing activity. And I was really excited that I was going to get a letter. Like, I'm actually going to get a letter in a few days, and even though it's from me, I'm going to get a letter. And so everybody at the centre will get a letter that they wrote to themselves. And it'll be interesting to see how they react, because they wrote that letter to themselves on what their a little bit of aspiration of what they're hoping that they're doing 2 or 3 weeks later from that session. Yeah, it's getting very emotional, and we're coming to the end of the year, and I think people are just, they're really ready for next year. It's been a really hard year with COVID. Families are noticing it, the consistency and national quality framework and meeting standards and everything like that is just all out the window, because when you've got staff and families going through trauma, then you've had the lockdown and families that are dealing with issues of being locked down, domestic violence, losing their jobs. All of the businesses at the wharf, after everything we've had, all the businesses at the wharf have just been closed down. So there's a lot happening in our service and in our town, and the families that are affected. So we're really, really looking forward to moving on to next year. Being positive and moving forward is one thing that we're looking forward to. We're already starting to plan for next year. And one of the ladies that did lose everything, I was very nervous telling her that with all the children that are moving up from the 2 to 3 room up into the preschool room, that someone really needed to go with them from the room, and I let her know, and she was so happy. So I think change can be something that's not welcomed, but I think this year, I think we're all looking for a bit of a change. We're getting through our days, getting through our weeks, and just really looking forward to a fresh start next year.
It is with absolute pleasure that I introduce our second speaker for this evening. Cathy Powzun is currently the Executive Director, Bushfire Relief Strategies, School Performance for the New South Wales Department of Education. Cathy is a passionate educational leader with a proven track record of fostering and enhancing school improvement. She has a strong commitment to working collaboratively with educational leaders, and she does this to cultivate the accomplishments of high expectations for learning and champion excellence at both the local and system level. In 2014, after 11 years as a dedicated principal at both Heckenberg and Liverpool West Public Schools, Cathy commenced the position of Director, Public Schools New South Wales, serving in support of both the Campbelltown and then Strathfield principal networks. Cathy is engaged as the Director, School Performance for the Office of Deputy Secretary, driving innovation, efficiency and evidence-based practices across more than 2,200 schools in the New South Wales public education system. And in her most recent role as Executive Director, Bushfire Relief Strategy, she works alongside learning communities and peak bodies in developing an education cluster approach to preparedness, response and recovery for those schools that have been impacted by the unprecedented 2019-2020 bushfire period. She's committed to the collaboration at all levels to ensure students are at the centre of all educational decision-making. And tonight, Cathy will be sharing with us some of the invaluable work the department has been doing in supporting children, families, teachers and communities. Please join me in welcoming Cathy.
It's a real privilege to be contributing to today's Early Start webinar and featuring on your program. Colleagues, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, for they hold the memories, traditions and hopes, and I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people amongst us today. Colleagues, recently I had an opportunity to visit Rocky Hall Preschool, and I just want to acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of the director who leads the learning community in Jodie Dickinson. Many of you may have recently viewed the segment that was featured on the ABC called Fireground Preschool. What I take away from this particular segment is the importance of connecting to country and the value of our young children being a part of the learnings and the experiences. I'd just like to take a few moments for us to pause and hear from our young people how they have connected to land.
I'd just like to pay our respects to the land we're on up here. We're not out at Rocky Hall Preschool today, we're out on Myrtle Mountain. There's been the fire out here. It's really sad for me coming up here and seeing all these burnt trees. These trees are like my family and all the little grasses and the animals. It's really sad to see my family struggling to live. But it's really nice that we're here today, connecting with the land. So Gayong Mujadalis, welcome friends, Jagalalis, children. Collect just a few leaves. We can grab a few little sticks, some charcoal. We don't want to lift the rocks up because there's going to be lots of animals under there trying to survive. And what have we got living here that we need to be careful of? The ant nests. We've all got this living memory of this trauma and this event that's happened. Just trying to get these kids out to see maybe some positive in the regeneration of the land, but also that awareness that it is suffering.
Tiny little tree. And a really, 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 really tiny one. Look how tiny that is.
We actually thought the fire front was at our house when we couldn't see 2 feet in front of us. Just came down with a big roar from the mountains, and all of a sudden the wind just changed direction and sucked the fire back into the forest. And just went dead silent, and we couldn't hear anything. And that was the most eeriest part. It's good for them to get out and be where the fires have been, and they can talk about it at home. Yeah, life is an education. Everything that you learn is from the land and from the people, the community.
I think we'll use the charcoal first. How about that? See how we can draw things with the charcoal?
Children are connected to nature more than any age group, and Nathan connects the children to the country through his knowledge and his culture. It seems natural to teach them about custodianship of the country, and it's in the context of their own lives. They're all living in the bush.
All right, can anyone remember the word? I know it's a new word and we've only been practicing for a little while. Yes, that's the one. Big clap.
Good.
Ganyi. Can we say it again? Ganyi. Ganyi.
I think it's excellent the way Nathan has brought Aboriginal culture into the preschool. It's probably opened up their eyes and ears for what's going on around us. They've come home with a few words that I don't understand, but I'm learning with them.
The sharing and handing down of culture is not just a privilege and something for Aboriginal people, but it's really something for all Australians. The most important thing I could ever impart onto anyone, particularly children, is respect for the land. It's always good to get out and be amongst family. The land's got a voice and it can hear ours.
I'm confident, colleagues, that you'd concur with me that Rocky Hall Preschool is just one of the many stories that talks to how we can support and instill hope through the teachings and learnings of our young people. Colleagues, today I'd really like to focus on the work that is being led by the New South Wales Department of Education. But before I begin, I'd just like to preface what I'm about to unpack with the fact that the early childhood education sector is an important part of the New South Wales Department of Education bushfire relief strategy, which was established after the catastrophic 2019-2020 bushfire season. As we know, more than 200 public school communities, many associated with early childhood education providers, were affected by those fires. 3 schools were destroyed, scores of others damaged, and 50,000 students directly affected by multiple school and setting closures, emergency evacuations, as well as having to contend with the thick smoke. While the loss of lives caused by the fires were tragic, it was clear to the department that many of our survivors needed support across a range of areas to begin recovery from the devastation. The Bushfire Relief Strategy Directorate was created to help develop in those learning communities and their local communities the confidence and ability to prepare, respond, and recover from bushfires and other emergency situations. Strengthening and sustaining educational outcomes for our young people from early childhood right through to post-school is a key principle of the strategy, and is ensuring such is flexible, scalable, and designed to meet the needs of each of our communities. Representatives from the early childhood sector are among the key stakeholders being consulted as we continue to develop and implement the strategy. And one of its first initiatives in the sector was a partnership with Wollongong University. And I owe thanks to Cathrine and her team, who were instrumental in producing early childhood education strategies and practices that support children and communities impacted by bushfires. There is a great report which is available on the University of Wollongong's website, Bushfire Response, Restoring a Sense of Safety and Security, along with its associated resources. Colleagues, the New South Wales Minister for Education and Early Childhood Learning, the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, is very much committed to continuing to do everything the state government and the department can do to support our learning communities that were impacted by fires, and moving forward supporting learning communities that are in areas which are identified to be bushfire prone or at high risk. First-hand knowledge is important to ensuring that the strategy learns what each bushfire affected learning community needs to revive and thrive. The effects of the bushfires on local communities vary widely, and there is no one size fits all. And that's why it's so important to hear from people on the ground about what they need to help them recover and how the strategy can work with them to help deliver it. I'm really keen to develop even closer links with the early childhood education sector to ensure that the strategy retains a strong focus on supporting particularly young children and their dedicated staff who care for them in times such as bushfires. Since starting in February, the strategy has worked with local communities, key stakeholders and peak bodies on a range of achievements, including improving counselling services through schools, as well as partnering with mental health experts, including Headspace and BU, to develop programs that meet the needs of children, staff and the community, as well as initiating the collection of a range of data to improve decision making by leaders in our early learning as well as our cross-sector learning communities, as well as those locally managing and providing support. And I really see this as an opportunity to begin conversations with you, and I encourage you to reach out should you have an interest and would like to contribute to supporting the realisation of the strategy. And what you see before you is the Bushfire Relief Strategy Framework. And I just want to zoom in on the vision, and that is ultimately our greatest hope for every learning community is that they're safe, connected and thriving. And there are a number of guiding principles that underpin the vision, the purpose and the mission. And what you can see further below is how we have phased the body of works to ensure that our practices are well informed and are sustained over time. And it's intel from you that really informs the direction of the strategy. Colleagues, recently we were issued with the final report of the New South Wales Bushfire Inquiry, and this was commissioned by the Premier Gladys Berejiklian in February. There are 76 recommendations reflected in the report, and they have all been endorsed by the New South Wales Government. What the Department of Education is doing currently is unpacking each of the recommendations to determine what the implications are for the education cluster when we talk to what does it mean for early childhood settings right through to post-school. So that body of work is taking place as we speak. In addition to that, we've also been issued the Royal Commission inquiry into bushfire, into national natural disasters, including bushfires. We received earlier on the interim observation, which really set out preliminary views. And further to that, we've received recently the report, which highlights another 80 recommendations. Again, there is a governance group that is looking at, with representation from the entire education cluster, to determine what the implications and the impact are for us in education and the work that needs to take place to support that work. Moving forward, I had an opportunity to represent education at the Emergency Management Australia briefing, and what was tabled were the conditions outlook for 2020-21. And I just want to highlight some of the activity that has been identified to be considered as similar, more likely, improvement likely, more than average. And what we can see here when it comes to bushfire activity, the likelihood compared to most years is similar. And when we talk to similar, we're talking to similar of previous years, not what we experienced during the 2019-2020 bushfires. And it's really important that we reflect on what it is that our learning communities have experienced, because for many, it wasn't just bushfire activity. For some, it was drought, which was compounded by bushfires, further to that, floods, and today we all are responding to the pandemic. Colleagues, the message that we're giving to our leaders in our educational settings is that it's really important as we enter into the summer that we update our emergency management plans, and really emphasising the importance of having strong communication and connection with community, ensuring that our parents and carers are well versed in what the plan looks like in the local community and what role each and every one of us have during such time. But also, what we're drawing attention to is acknowledging the potential shifts in student and staff wellbeing and ensuring that we're developing plans to meet these needs. I've been working closely with Kristen Douglas, who leads Headspace nationally, where we're looking at what else is it that we could be doing to better support our students and staff in our early childhood settings, in our primary settings, in our secondary settings, in our higher education settings, whether it be universities, TAFE, and cross-sector in our public settings, our private settings, as well as our Catholic independent settings as well. So that is the focus at this point in time as we continue to firm up what the implications are from the reports that have been tabled at the state and federal level. But we're really interested in hearing from you. We're interested in hearing what is working, what requires strengthening, what additional support and resourcing is needed, because ultimately our greatest hope is to continue to strengthen the relationships that have already been established, initiate those that are new, and really firm up what the direction looks like to ensure that we're optimising opportunities and really achieving great outcomes for the educational cluster. And I just want to also acknowledge the time that you've given to be a part of today's webinar, because what that demonstrates is that you too are invested in ensuring that we're leaving no stone unturned to better support the learning communities that we serve. Thank you once again for having me, and I look forward to answering any questions during the Q&A that will take place. Thanks again.
Our third speaker for this evening is Mark Donovan. Mark has worked as a clinical psychologist with children and families for over 25 years across a range of settings in Australia and the UK. For the past 15 years, Mark has taught and supervised the next generation of child clinical psychologists within the School of Psychology here at the University of Wollongong. His main interests are in emotional and behavioural problems in children aged between 3 and 12 years. Mark is a regular presenter for Early Start and was one of the contributors to the Bushfire resource website produced at the start of the year, which provides valuable insight on restoring a sense of safety and security in children. Tonight, Mark will examine the effects of trauma on children and how we can work together to restore safety and security in the affected communities. Join me in welcoming Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Donovan. I'm a clinical psychologist from Northfields Clinic at the University of Wollongong, and I'm also somebody who's worked with children and families for over 25 years. And so I want to share a few thoughts with you today about how we can support children, families and communities in times of crisis to help restore a sense of safety. You'll see a number of images today that I want to thank the children and teachers from Cambago Public School for, as well as Little Scribe Books, who have put forward a publication that they allowed us to use for this talk that really helps us tell the story of how to restore safety, and as well as the threats, and helps us remember the power of storytelling. So there's two main things I'm going to do. One is about helping us to understand how children respond to traumatic stress. And then we're going to think about 3 strategies that help build resilience, not only for children, but for all of us. And these 3 strategies are not just at times of crisis and stress, they're strategies we can use all of the time. So here's Gunyi, a terrible, fearsome, fiery monster that swept through the town of Cambago and many other towns across New South Wales, Australia, and indeed across the globe, destroying everything in its path, bringing heat, darkness, terrible sound, and in its wake leaving destruction. loss, sadness, fear, pain. And this drawing captures Lucinda's version of this. It's very powerful. There were many homes lost. Indeed, of the school of Cabargo, of the 65 students of that school, 17, there was a loss of homes for their families. And yet, just a month later, here we are, and here's a family from Cabargo, outside school, first day. And there's this resilience shown, this capacity to recover from adversity despite the challenges and pursue what's important. And on this day, what's important is going back to school, resuming a normal life. We'll talk about the importance of that later. So you don't need me to remind you of the unusual and frightening times that we're living through with these threats of bushfire, but also more broadly, global warming. And of course, coronavirus and all of the impacts that that's had. And we've been relatively lucky within Australia compared to across other countries in the world. And we know that this has impacted families. We've seen the rates of anxiety, depression, stress go up by close to 50% on most metrics, domestic violence. We know about the terrible impacts of stress and anxiety and grief and trauma on all of us and on families. So our focus today is on that trauma and grief. And we're talking here about either a threat to life or actual loss of life. And we know that way too many families have been affected, impacted by these recent global events. Inside our heads, we have this wonderful bit of matter called the brain. And within that brain, we have the capacity to rise to the very top of the food chain on this planet, despite not being the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, the biggest teeth, the sharpest claws. We get to the top of the food chain because we can solve problems. We have this wonderful brain in our heads that enables us to discover new ways of resolving issues. So we're not just living in a cave in a puddle anymore. And also, as part of this, we're able to make meaning of things. And that meaning making is really important. And there's all these connections that happen throughout our brains and that help us. And also we function well, and our brains feels good, and it's in a good space when we believe the world is safe, life is predictable, and that there's a sense of control. And you can imagine this little brain's made out of some Lego pieces that are all connected up, like our connected brains. And we can think about those Lego pieces as representing little events, little things that have happened. And each of those little Lego pieces would then be stored away inside our toy cupboard at home, which is like our mind. Our mind is like a great big cupboard. And there'll be all the other toys in there too in the toy cupboard, because there'll be all the other things that have happened. What happened this morning? What's happening later today? What happened last week? These are little moments, little things that we put inside our cupboards of our minds. And when the world is safe, life's predictable, and we have a sense of control, that cupboard's looking pretty neat and tidy. We can open the doors and nothing falls out. And we can get things that we need. We can remember something that we need to remember in order to solve a problem or work out what to do next. However, in the face of a threat, particularly if that's a sustained threat, and that there is a fear of loss of life or actual loss of life, then it's like our brain gets disconnected. All those little pieces of Lego no longer connected up and no longer able to pass messages so easily around the brain. And again, if we're thinking about it like our toy cupboard, it's like someone got inside that cupboard and just messed everything up. Now when you open the doors, things fall out. And for that reason, you don't want to open those doors. And that's often what we notice after we've experienced some sort of trauma or grief, is that it's too much at first. There's too much pain, too much fear. And so we keep the doors closed. We don't think about it. But eventually, something reminds us and the doors fly open and we start experiencing or remembering those things that we find difficult to think about. And yet that's the process by which we restore that sense of safety and order, is by picking up the things that we notice keep falling out, the scary stuff, the painful stuff, and having a look at it, making sense of it. Because if we can make sense, if we can make meaning of this, then we can fold it up nice and tidy and pop it back into the cupboard. In a way, that's the process that we need to go through when we have experienced something traumatic. Because at the time, the world doesn't feel safe, life doesn't feel predictable, and we don't have a sense of control. And so we need to restore that in order to restore that sense of safety. So what do we see on the outside? We see a whole bunch of different behaviors in children when they're experiencing stress, anxiety, grief. And with trauma, we've got these three key things of avoidance. We don't want it's too much. Any reminders of it? Smoke. We know that that the olfactory nerve is the shortest one to the brain, and so smell will often be the thing that triggers us most. So for people who've experienced a bushfire, then the smell of smoke could be very terrifying unless we can make meaning of it, unless we can realize, actually, this isn't a scary smoke, this is an okay smoke. And then it changes everything, which is, again, this power of the brain, is to make meaning of things, to make them okay. We relive the trauma in various ways. Things fall out of the cupboard. This could be flashbacks, it could be thoughts which lead to questions. Am I okay? Is this safe? Is that safe? Lots and lots of questions. And it could be through different playthings, drawings, whatever else. And also we're watching for that cupboard doors to spring open. We're on edge. Our brains don't want us to go to sleep because then the bad thing might happen again. It's like there's a tiger prowling, and if we go to sleep, the tiger will get us. So we stay awake. We're on edge. And of course, inside the brain, there's a very important bit of kit called an amygdala, or we can call it AMY for short, which is our danger detector. All the time, it's searching, looking. It's deep inside our brains, and it's connected up with lots of brain structures. And as soon as it spots something that it perceives as dangerous, smoke, what's that? What was that noise? Then the alarm goes off, and we know that happens within the space of time between those two claps. The adrenaline, cortisol released to our body, preparing us to deal with the threat. The frontal lobe hasn't even worked out what's going on. Our body, though, is ready to go. It's ready for this fight, flight, freeze response. Throughout our whole body, there's all these changes. Heartbeat, lungs, taking in the oxygen. Blood going to our arms and our legs to fight or run. Away from our stomachs. Digesting food is not a priority. You know, digesting lunch is not a priority if you're about to be lunch. Is again, this is an old part of our brain, 600 million years old. It's the reptilian brain, it sometimes gets described as. It's a reptilian response to a threat. And of course, if you're a little person, you want to be with the big people because they're there to keep you safe. That's their job. Really importantly, we know that even if there wasn't actually a threat, even if you were actually quite safe, but if you perceive it like you are under a significant threat, your body responds like there's a threat, then the amygdala stores that in your hippocampus, in your memory, as an actual threat. So the brain can't distinguish between what's real, a real threat, versus one you just imagined. You get the same reactions throughout your body, and it gets remembered as a threat. And now you want to avoid anything like that. So you now don't want to do a whole bunch of stuff, even though the stuff's actually safe. So what can we do? Three main strategies. I'm going to go through quickly now. Creating safety, building connection, pursuing satisfaction. How do we create safety? Well, we try and reduce the threats, for one thing. So we don't expose ourselves to all the doom scrolling, ourselves as the big people. Because if we look okay and if we are okay in our heads, we convey that message to the small people that life's okay. Also, we think about what they're being exposed to directly in terms of, TV, media. We think about the conversations we have in front of them. Try and reduce the ones that are maybe less helpful. Increase the ones that say to them the world is okay and it's all good. As long as we do these things, we wash our hands. Create routines or recreate the routines. We know as humans we thrive when there's clear routines. Children thrive when there's clear rules and routines to the day. They know where they are, they know they're safe. And that's part of that safety of providing a secure base for them to go off and explore the world, to go and find out stuff. But also a safe haven, because if they get upset, sad, tired, whatever it is, little people have got less capacity to be able to regulate their emotions than we do. That's something we develop throughout life. And so we need to be there to help them reorganize their feelings so they can go off and explore again. That's how we create safety. We also create some safety through building connection with social engagement. Humans are very social beings. It's natural for us to gaze in each other's eyes, to engage socially, and through that to express love, care, kindness. Because this child is experiencing something that just feels very special in this moment. They feel loved, they feel cared for, they feel soothed, they feel safe. That's happening. And so we just need to pause and allow that to happen, allow those moments where we do engage socially and to be present in them, but equally to receive it. Because this mum, man, if you've got a little kid looking up at you like this, gee, that could feel very good. That could feel really good. That could help you deal with all sorts of stuff that might happen later in the day. That's resilience right there. But we need to be open to it. And we need to be open to it inside our own minds, being kind to ourselves, being soothing to ourselves, so that we can then be that for our children. So, social beings, and we need to build those connections. The other thing is to then pursue satisfaction, achievement, through doing fun stuff, reaching for the stars, helping our children to reach for the stars, doing things. And if we do it together, we get both a hit of dopamine, but also a hit of oxytocin, serotonin, through that experience of the social connection. Doing it is one thing, but we need to notice it. We need to allow it to soak in. We need to be present with what it is and to notice the enjoyment of what we're doing. And maybe even label that for our children so they get to soak it up too, just to, again, share that social engagement by noticing something very special that might be happening. We know that getting outside is a really important thing. It's good to be reminded to just do it, because generally good things happen when you get outside, and to have a go, that great Australian saying. So it's both having it in terms of doing things, but it's also enjoying it, soaking it up, and doing that many times a day. By doing these things, we're able to restore then our sense of safety. We relearn that the world is largely safe and predictable, and that even if bad things happen, we can cope. And we've got a whole bunch of fun stuff to do. So get out of my road. That's how we restore our sense of safety, and that's what builds resilience, which is, as I said before, 2/3 acquired through our learning, what we experience. So thank you to the children of Cobargo School who wrote this beautiful book, because although there was Gunyi, the sun eventually won her war with the darkness, and she bravely smiled across the farms and valleys once again. The colours came back. The burnt land was kissed by the sun. And a reminder that, as the Cobargo children said, the community is small, but our spirit is strong. Gunyi will never take that from us. And so that's what we're talking about here, is resilience. And through this power of storytelling, making sense of, we can help restore that sense of safety and help us to enjoy all the good things that are around us.
Hi, my name's Kim Stousley, and I'm part of the team at Early Start University of Wollongong that developed the Bushfire Response website. The website came about to help guide early childhood education and care setting to restoring a sense of safety and security after the devastating bushfires, using evidence to inform effective ways to support wellbeing. We were very well aware of the significant impact that the fires had across the communities and wanted to resource the early childhood sector with a holistic guide that supported educators in working towards recovery. The website has 5 key sections that can be easily navigated to. There's a panel on the side, or you can click the images down below. The key areas that we've pulled out is understanding the impact. In this section, we look at supporting short and long-term progress and how to assess the progress of children. In the next section, we look at understanding your community and focus on supporting families and include a really important Indigenous perspective. We also introduce you to Christy and Fiona from Cooler Preschool and include a really important, powerful case study about their experience of overcoming adversity and recovering from bushfire. The third section is supporting the children, and we look at developmentally appropriate responses and using the tools that we have as educators to support children. Our team focuses on the importance of supporting educator wellbeing, and additional resources helps you when you're seeking further support and additional help for recovery. The website also includes an introduction from Cooler Preschool, and an opportunity to meet our contributors as well. Psychologist Mark Donovan, Associate Professor Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett, myself and early childhood teacher Kim Stousley, Kirsty, Fiona and Joe from Cooler Preschool Kindergarten, and Craig Marshman, who is a part of the Fire Command in Bateman's Bay and brings a unique Aboriginal perspective. Each section also includes resources that have clear links, explanations, and easy access to further support. If you click on one of the links to the sections, it takes you straight to a short explanation along with a series of short videos you can use. And we hope that you will be able to use these to guide your reflective practice. They can start conversations, they can be shared at staff meetings or with your families, and act as a provocation to access additional resources as well. So that we hope that you find the Bushfire Response website useful in your preparedness and reflection for the bushfire season. Thank you.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Q&A session of our evening. Welcome to Kathy and Kim online there. Hello, how are you going?
Really well. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Hi Kim. You've got your hand right up at the screen there, so maybe we'll just get you to take that away, otherwise we can't see your beautiful face. Thank you.
I'm just going to put the light on, it's gotten really dark.
In the room with me, I have Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett and Mark Donovan. So we've got a lovely sort of online and offline panel. My name's Leanne Gibbs. And thanks to people who have asked questions, and feel free to keep asking questions. I've got some nice curly ones here, or at least some very long ones. So, and then I'm also going to ask Cathrine a little bit about the themes that we've heard tonight. So thanks so much for your presentations. Kim's left us. But I'm sure she'll be back.
Just have the light on.
Yeah. She's managing an emergency. So, Kathy, thank you so much for talking about the initiatives of the department. I think one of the things that I felt really concerned about was that list that you showed. It was incredible, but it was, I guess, reassuring as well to think about the thinking that the department has up ahead about the sorts of crises that we will be thinking about in the future. But one question that has come from Matt Simpson is quite a long question, so I can repeat it if you would like me to. But given that New South Wales state government has responsibility for many of the educational assets throughout the state, as well as significant areas of land that often present bushfire risk, have there been any discussions across state government departments to identify strategies to better manage these tensions and plan for the growing footprint of towns, communities and individual facilities, which are often located on or adjacent to bushfire-prone land. So I'm going to, that's quite a long and complex question, but I'm sure it's one that you've dealt with in the past.
Yeah, look, thank you so much, Matt. A really good question, particularly as we head into the next summer. What I will say, I'll speak from the department's position. The department is implementing what we call the Bushfire Hazard Mitigation Program, and that's in preparation to the 2020-2021 bushfire season. So what the program includes is approximately 760 bushfire vegetation maintenance plans are in place for all of our schools that have dense bushland adjoined to educational settings. And an annual asset protection zone maintenance program is in place, which allows for relevant works to be carried out in response to what's been identified. So what our school infrastructure directorate does within the department is assesses each of the assets to determine what works are required, and that is carried out on an annual basis, and that's really to prepare and position our sites as we enter into each bushfire season. In response to a broader response to the question that you asked, Matt, what I'll say is since the 2019-2020 bushfires, the New South Wales government has mobilised a number of state resilience and recovery groups across the state, where we have representation from the various government agencies where we are responding to matters that arise. And we're well placed, as we have recently seen the New South Wales government establish Resilience New South Wales, which is led by Shane Fitzsimmons, the Commissioner, and he is taking the lead in working with government agencies to respond to recommendations that have come out of the state inquiry, some of which speak to bush vegetation maintenance plans as well. So some work has been progressed. I can only speak for that of the department, but I'm involved in conversations cross-government where we're working through determining what the implications are more broadly for our communities.
Thanks, Cathy. Now, Kim, I've got one for you, also from Matt, and this is I hope that you've been able to see all of the comments that people have made, thanking you for your contribution to tonight and wishing your staff well. And I guess this is in that same context. Have you noticed any children, families or staff with raised anxiety levels over the past few weeks, now that we're in bushfire season once again? And approaching the anniversary of the fire event? And if so, how are you responding as a centre leader?
So we have had a family that lived in a bushfire-prone area, and the child's behaviour has reflected the last summer, where she smelt smoke, and it was like, she's 5 now, so she was only 4 at the beginning of the year. So that's impacted her, that she would smell smoke, and it's like, right, we've got to pack everything up, let's go. So it's a little bit of, is that what she's hearing from her parents? Is she acting out of I heard this from, that's what they said last summer, now I'm smelling smoke, so this is what we need to do now every time we smell smoke. So that's sort of the only impact we've really had at this time of the year. There hasn't really been too much happening. It's all been very kosher at the moment. I think the wind has been a big factor in children's lives at the moment because every time it's windy, the wind is an anxious thing at the moment because wind with the bushfires. I know some children that they hear the wind, they're like, I don't want to go outside because it's windy. So yeah, so it's sort of just playing it by ear of what was normal last year and then what's happening this year and the impacts of what's happening. So we're not quite sure yet what this year's going to be like moving into the new summer. But we've had a lot of rain, so parents have been reassuring children it's raining, that's really good, so we can't get fires when it's raining. So that's the kind of feedback we've been getting.
Great, thanks, Kim. And I'll follow up with Mark in a moment on some of those things that you were talking about, but I'm just going to throw to Cathrine to talk about what some of the themes were that you heard in all of these wonderful presentations and respond to them.
First of all, I want to thank all three speakers for your contribution. I think it was amazing. I'm madly writing notes as I was listening to all three of you, and I think collectively what you talked about really highlighted the complexity of the situation, but it also, for me, really shone a light on the important work that educators and teachers do in the lives of children and families and communities. And I think I wanted to start first on touching something that you said, Kim. And I've had the pleasure of seeing you work, and I know that you come from a place of high quality practice. And one of the comments that you made was that the frameworks just went out the window. And But I'm actually going to argue that they didn't. So much of what you talked about and the practice that you engage with was really about reconnecting and connecting with our guiding and foundational documents and principles. So in fact, it really showed me, and we talk about resilience and what high quality practice does for educators and for children and for families. And you've provided a source of resilience for those children. And so if we think about the themes and so much of what Mark talked about in Cathy's question at the end that talks about what is working, I think what's working for the early childhood sector is so much of what we do as our core business and our practice places us well to support children and families. So I see that the importance of relationships and the prioritization of relationships, the importance of establishing a sense of familiarity and routines and that sense of continuity. And I saw that echoed in Cathy's talk where she talked about establishing connections across the education sectors and how important that is. And I really applaud that as a focus. And so that, and we all talked about that sense of connection and sense of connection with community. And we talk about the early childhood service as being a community and fostering that sense of belonging, and the early childhood education service as being a safe haven for children and for adults. And across all of the talks, it was that focus on well-being and child well-being and adult well-being. And I think one of the things that we often do as educators is we park our own well-being for preference of looking after children. But I think what Mark talked about and what you talked about, Kim, is the importance of fostering high quality relationships amongst staff and staff collegiality, and the importance of looking after ourselves as adults so that we are well positioned then to look after children and families. And so they were some of the themes that I thought were really important, and that I loved Mark's talk about finding moments of joy. And I guess before I hand back, I do just want to comment a little bit about that question around children's behaviour at the moment and the trauma. And I think one of the things that's important for educators and how we can support them, because I think a lot of our practices were probably more reactionary, and I think we've got real opportunity to engage in forward planning and draw on evidence-informed practices and processes. And I think we really need to think about the impact of the anniversary on children. And for young children, they find it very confusing to understand what's happening through the media. And we know from previous experiences from September 11th, from the Bali bombing, from previous fires, that anniversary events can be just as traumatic as the actual event for children. And I think moving forward, it's really important that we prepare and support educators to support children and families at this time.
Yes, and it's managing the educator feelings
Yeah.
as well as the children's feelings, because it's creating that safe environment. So, Mark, this is a great time to flip to you. One thing that I'm interested in, I hope this question isn't kind of out of line, is how do we get the balance? You talked about routines and having routine. How do we get the balance between routines and too much structure so that we've got these safe sort of routines? And also, how do adults know when to stop giving support so that there's the resilience building that happens, which isn't, So they're kind of the two things that, that I was thinking about.
So, and I can hear, like in some ways, they're very related questions. So that in terms of structure, you need enough to support, the day and what's happening, and then get sort of movement. But then, you don't want that then limiting the child. So really important to explore, because if it's too structured and too routine based, there's no exploration. It's just all routine and structure. So, but we need enough to kind of get us so we feel safe. We know where we are. We know this is now the point when this happens, and then we might start exploring around the edges of that, which is the growth area. Like, so for all of us, like we never stop learning and growing through exploration. So look, I'm much less familiar with preschool settings than probably everybody else who's involved in this. But I'm just thinking of the memories of my own kids back in preschool days, and those beautiful, hello songs and goodbye songs and all these little things that we do that just kind of help people. But then once that's happened, it's then opening it up to sort of follow the child's interests, follow the child's needs, and I don't know if you want me to pick up on the anniversary one, or we may come back to that.
Go for it.
Yeah. So have I answered the first question?
I think so, and I think you're also talking about the dependability of the environment that the children are in. So it's not so much about the really structured sort of organisation of routines, but some of the reliability and the dependability.
Yes. So
in
it's
that
consistent. It's the predictable. So we like predictability as humans. We don't like it when we don't know what's happening. And that we don't respond well to that. So yes, you want to have some predictability, but that's boring if it's all predictable, right? So of course, that third thing of explore and find things and do fun things. Fun things generally aren't the routines. They're just the things that get you started.
Yes. And you can go out from there.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
It's a place, and then in terms of how much we need to be present to help a child, is that idea of sort of scaffolding that sometimes gets described, where you scaffold as much as is needed, but no more. So if a child's stuck, you notice they're stuck. You don't unstick them. Like if they're trying to build something and then they're putting it together, but it keeps falling over, you say, isn't that tough when it falls over? It's happened again. So just by your words, you're helping them to manage this moment of frustration. You don't pick it up and show them how to do it, because maybe they could explore and discover that themselves, which would be then much more enjoyable. So,
And now to the anniversary question.
Yeah. So absolutely. So I, definitely second what Catherine's saying in terms of, and then just thinking, Kim, for you and your situation there as well. We know that those reminders are just like when I was talking about the old cupboard of the mind, and like the cupboard doors will spring open at those times when we're reminded of anniversaries. And like obviously the first one will be the hardest one, and you're talking about some of this little 5-year-old who has got already the trigger of smoke. And I'm just thinking of like, as we go further into summer, there'll be all the other reminders of like the last day of term and the relationship of fire to that for some people, or there could be the assembly that they're having, or the
Christmas tree,
or there'll be all these little things that you won't even know, but each of them will be burned into their memories of, this is associated with the threat. This is when the bad things happen. And it was such a beautiful story you told of, this, like, I smell smoke, we need to go now. Like, because it is that very concrete understanding of like, this has happened, we need to do this. And I guess, as adults, we're trying to help children make sense of it by preparing them. It's like, and there's that balance of not wanting to re-traumatize in the process. And but provide, again, it's a bit like the structure one, you're providing enough of a framework to allow the stories to come out, but not necessarily saying to kids, so look, next Thursday is going to be the day then things got really bad, guys, so who's scared about that? May not be so helpful, but it's like just having stories of like, say, how are we all doing today? And then just allowing things to come out of that would be a nice way of doing it. I suppose if there are specific anniversaries, then maybe being more thoughtful and more watchful, I suppose. You'd be watching, waiting to see if you saw something happen. But here I am, and look, I was saying to these guys before, Kim, like, don't put me in that situation, put you in that situation, because you'd know what to do. Intuitively, you just know what to do, which is what Cathrine was saying.
One of the things that's coming up for us is, we finish on the 18th of December. We are out of there. We're on holidays for 3 weeks. But then the week that we start back at the centre, it will have been 12 months since the fires. So we are starting the year with an anniversary of loss. So so the anniversary will be in the last week that we're on holidays. So we will come back and everyone will have remembered what had happened 12 months ago. So we actually don't know what we're walking into when we come back next year, even though there may not be fires. That trauma is going to be revisited again. And the children, they may not have even remembered it from last year, but the conversations that they're going to be hearing, the news feeds that they're going to be hearing, the discussions, that environmental impact will bring up, oh, this is what's happening. So so what we're seeing is what their families and the environments that they're coming from and the information they're getting from those contexts of the environments are actually impacting the children more than the actual event. So it's the way the families are feeling and talking and reacting to these events that are happening 12 months ago that we will be dealing with.
So on that point, Kim, and just moving to Cathy here about some of those things you're talking about as a leader, sort of, how you are managing these things. And I heard Cathy talking about how there was an onus on the leaders to look at management plans and consider those things. Are there any particular supports for leaders in services, Cathy, that you would recommend to, cover off on these things, but also to be supporting themselves?
Yeah, and look, I'd just like to preface it, Leanne, with my own personal narrative. So 40 years ago, as a primary school age student, I walked home with my younger sibling home one afternoon to a home that had been burnt to the ground due to fire. And it has only been recently me entering into the role where a principal colleague had driven me to what was once her home and had been lost in the fires in the area of Batlow. And it was at that point that I had the flashback 40 years on of having lost our home. And I remember flying back to Sydney that evening and me picking up the phone and saying to my husband, I'm just going to drop into Mum and Dad's. And he said, make your way home. And I said, no, I want to go see Mum and Dad. And I remember walking through the door and thanking them for the environment that they created following the loss of our home. Because at no point in time, there were two things I grieved for. That was my gollywog and my Helen Keller book, my favourite book, I lost in the fire. But what I will say is my parents and those around us created a safe, nurturing environment where I can never say that I experienced what one may define as trauma. And I attribute that to, the conversations that my parents protected us from, You know, often we know that, you know, when we speak to young children, we're hearing through them the conversations of adults. And I never recall that. And when we did lose our home, it was 2 weeks leading up to Christmas. And when I sat down and had a cup of tea, thanking my parents only recently for, you know, the environment that they created for us during that time of loss, I recall my mother sharing, "That's why I don't buy Christmas presents until Christmas Eve," because that was the one year she was organised and lost all of our Christmas presents. So, you know, I think, you know, there's no one size fits all. I think that's the message I want to leave with people. Everyone's experience is unique to them, and the way in which they respond will be unique to them as well. And we need to be respectful and mindful of that. So, you know, there is no silver bullet that's going to, you know, cure people from what they have experienced. And, you know, as I said, it was 40 years on, I had blocked what I had experienced. You know, as an
Interesting though, how powerful it was for you that you've actually remembered those things that you lost in that fire, and also, you know, your mother's memories from that time. So it does kind of tell us a lot about what's laid down in the past, isn't it? You're still grieving in a way for those things that you might have lost.
Yes, but never spoken about it for, you know, 40 years. It's through, you know, a drive up a mountain and seeing a blanket, you know, a piece of land with no home that triggered what I had personally experienced. And entering into the role of Executive Director, Bushfire Relief Strategy, at no point did I think, well, I've got something to bring to the role from my own life experience, because that was blocked. You know, it was not even a factor when I had applied for the role that I'm in. But what I will say is, you know, as many communities reach significant dates on the calendar, 12 months on, we're very cognizant that there may be a shift in, you know, our children, our young people and our staff's behaviours. And, you know, what we're well positioned to do is to facilitate links with some of the services that exist beyond the school gate, you know, through health, through, you know, various government agencies, independent bodies that can support us in ensuring that we're meeting the individual and the collective needs of those that do require that support. And, you know, to your point, Kim, in relation to, you know, you leading your learning community, one thing that the department has invested in is we have over 60% of our principals in those schools that were impacted by bushfires in their first 5 years of principalship. And having been a principal, you know, a good day is a great day, but to be thrown some lead balls into the mix as you know, a fairly new principal can be quite confronting. So we've injected some support by offering a personalised coaching program for them, which we call Thriving for Tomorrow, and that's been customised to support our leaders in schools in leading their communities effectively as they continue to recover and respond to their own personal experiences and the loss that as a community many have faced.
Will there be an opportunity to extend that to early childhood leaders, Cathy? Is that in the works?
Look, we have a number of our early childhood personnel from the department on this evening. I just want to call out Louisa. I can see her name on the attendee list. And we've been working very closely. And yes, we have mobilised support, and we continue to work with our cluster, our education cluster, to ensure that we are injecting the right support. Headspace and BU have been pivotal in supporting our early childhood settings, our primary school settings and our secondary settings, to support the leadership, to support students and to support families. So that is one of the offerings that we can facilitate.
Fantastic. And just before we go to someone else, Cathy, I was wondering what were maybe the surprising learnings or the learnings that the department had in this process of responding to the fires.
Look, you know, as I mentioned in the presentation, the intel is vital to the realisation of the strategy. And it's through the interactions and the conversations where we have been better informed to secure what it is that people need on the ground. So, you know, we have representation from across all divisions of the department. We have representation from government, peak bodies, and our stakeholders, as well as representation from our independent Catholic schools and early childhood setting, as well as higher education, where we continue to work through, you know, what is it that we need to ensure that we are well equipped and well prepared to respond to any unprecedented event, whether it be another bushfire season to the scale of what we've recently experienced, whether it be a flood. We, you know, ultimately, what we're hoping for is for a system approach, knowing that should anything arise, we know what it is that we need to mobilise and when to support people on the ground.
Great, thank you. And just to make a note of the bushfire site as well that was funded by the department, and we saw Kim going through that in between your presentations and this Q&A session, so we'll just draw people's attention to that.
I must say, I just want to acknowledge that work. I mean, that was my introduction to Cathrine. I read a newspaper article and I said to my EA, I want you to track this woman down. I want to connect with her, and I just want to thank you, Cathrine, for the investment and your passion, you know, to ensure that, you know, educational provision isn't compromised, and we collectively ensure that there is that wraparound support for our learning communities.
Well, it sounds like a good time to ask Cathrine a question. Thanks, Cathy.
Thanks, Cathy.
Just in terms of that, when obviously that was kind of the connection with the department, but what was it that came to mind for you when you were sort of thinking about what this might mean for early childhood services, and also to and fro between you and Kim about what it means for centre leaders as well?
Yeah, and I think just picking up on Cathy's comment about the importance of conversations, and I think here at Early Start in UOW, we're very connected with our sector, particularly around the regional and rural areas and through our engagement centre network. So we were hearing stories where there was a real need for support. And I think educators are driven by an absolute commitment to do the best that they can for children and families. But I think one of the real challenges that was presenting them, that it was really difficult to navigate and decipher all the resources that were out there. And so while we're acknowledging there's real specialties there, we acknowledge BU, the work of Emerging Minds, Headspace, but for us, we really wanted to bring that together and contextualise that within an early childhood educational platform and really direct educators to evidence-informed, high-quality practices that would support children and families. And I guess for us, we were, like Cathy's saying, that you are now prepared for any type of crisis, and you've approached it from that system. And we adopted that same systemic lens in that we understood that for many regional communities, the early childhood service is the hub of that community. And so you have traumatized families, you have children that are displaced. You've got a sense of disconnection. And so for many, this was the place that they came for support. And so educators were being asked to do something that really wasn't within their job description. And so what we were trying to do is give them the information that they needed to put them in a position where they could effectively support children and families. And I think a lot of the work that we did, and Mark was a contributor to that, holds true for any level of trauma. And I think we need to recognise that this has happened in the backdrop of COVID, and many families are living in levels of what I would describe as toxic stress and impacting them. And so I think there's real challenges moving forward. And so that was really what we saw as our goal in bringing the voices of educators and supporting them in the really critical roles that they did and the longevity of it. So Cathy talked about the importance of forward planning, and we know just the description from Kim and Cathy's lived experience that she just shared with us, that vulnerabilities can emerge at very unexpected times. So this isn't something that's happened and now we're moving on. We don't know the impact, how long this impact is going to happen. And we've moved from floods to bushfires to COVID. So there is high levels of stress that people are experiencing. And so for us, it was the longevity and in supporting them around that and the multiple voices.
So in that context, Kim, you've highlighted a couple of initiatives that have really supported you and your team, and you're talking about those things that are coming through now. Can you just say what those are and how they have helped?
I think just knowing, having the consistency of this is where we are and this is what we're doing, and the support for each other. It's a small community, so I think that's one thing that we have going for us. And we know each other pretty well by now, and it's, people know you're having a bad day. And then people, you know what? They know when I'm having a bad day. So that's pretty good as well. But this, the support and being approachable. They know they can approach me and tell me what they need and what they can't do at the moment. I think just that support of the support of the team at the moment is really well, and we've had new staff come into the team this year as well, and it's been a big adjustment for them to come into a very tight-knit team and find their feet as well in amongst everything that's happened this year. So it's for me it is I know my team and I know how they are motivated, and I know when they need time off, and it's working with them to meet their needs, but also meeting the consistency of the children as well. Like they need, like I've got children when their teacher is away, I've got children that are crying because she's not there. So so it's I think it's just we're like a brick wall. We build and we use our bricks to prop each other up and just be there for each other and understand. And it's not a usual workplace that you would think that you would work in, but being a leader in these times of this year has been against all rules, I think, because in early childhood it's a leadership versus management, but everything that's happened this year has been more about, I understand what's happening for you as a person and I'm here for you, but I've really got to keep this place going and keep the consistency for the families and the children. So that's a tricky question, Leanne.
And what about I know that you're getting more offers of sort of support from agencies and organisations as well now. That's starting to come through. So what sort of support has that been for you?
So there's a lot of support within the recovery, the bushfire recovery, but I don't think there's not a lot of understanding of what is meant by bushfire recovery. It's not just about people having to have their houses rebuilt. It's also about mental health and programs to funding for programs within the community. So these are the things like for our community where we've had everything that's happened this year, and then all the businesses that have been closed down at the wharf. So now all the borders have opened and all the tourists are coming back, but there's nowhere for them to go. So it's about, okay, there's a lot of funding there for mental health recovery for these bushfires, and it's about working together in this community to who knows that what's there, what's available, so that the community can be a part of what's available. It's not just about building houses that have been burnt down. It's about the mental health and the programs for families to become a part of together. So it's about, I think it's really going to bring the community together once they understand what the bushfire recovery programs are about.
Great, thanks, Kim. I'm going to ask you a question that we sort of asked when you were thinking about your presentation, Mark, and it was, you had a beautiful book in the presentation.
Oh, yes.
So can you tell us about that book?
Yeah. Well, look, just coincidentally, I just saw this little piece in the paper and I thought, wow, what a beautiful picture at first, which was Gunyi. And it was like, wow, what an amazing picture. It just captures everything about it. And then I read the piece under, it was like, oh my gosh, what beautiful people, what beautiful kids, what beautiful teachers. And then also then there was a backstory to that, which was Little Scribe, which is the sort of the publisher of this book, has sort of got a similar bunch of books. And in fact, there's two more in this this series of the son coming back and telling more stories. So so it was lovely for me to find that, because you know, even just listening to what we're talking about here and thinking about the things that Cathrine was talking about, like, yeah, there's all these threats. And we've got a brain that picks up on the threats. It's biased for threats. It's always looking for bad things. And that's what keeps you alive. And so, but as humans, we have this capacity to also make meaning of things and create safety through meaning. So even just, I'm thinking of your little 5-year-old again, Kim, and thinking, yeah, so smoke can mean a lot of things. And smoke previously meant fun. It was like you're out camping and you got a fire going and it's great. And now it's changed. It's changed. So fire's changed, but fire can come back. And like fire, if we go back far enough, of course, fire was what helped us humans like a long way back. You know, it provided a whole bunch of things. It provided warmth, which then kept us alive a bit longer. So, but smoke also means backburning. Smoke means that people are managing things in a way so the bad thing doesn't happen again. And so we can help children to learn that, oh no, this is good smoke. This means this good thing's happening. And so, you know, like with coronavirus, like there's a bunch of stuff that's happening right now in terms of vaccines that are good things. And we can help children to learn about these good things that are happening as well. And through stories, then, like, I like the story because stories are a natural medium into children's worlds. And I know as a therapist working with kids, I'm always looking out for good storybooks, because I know that if I try and have a conversation with a child about, so how are you feeling? And it's hard for them to talk about that, but I say, hey, do you want to come and read this story? And then we're reading about this character in the book, and it's like, does anything like that ever happen to you? Was that, you know? And like, so suddenly they'll tell their story through this story. And then it's really nice when the story ends nicely too. Like that particular story ended nicely. So stories are part of human beings. Like we've passed stuff down throughout the generations through story. So stories are good.
Yes.
Just building on from the text that you shared, only a fortnight ago, I went and visited Cobargo Public School, and I met all of the illustrators and the authors of the book. And I was in awe of what they'd shared. But what was apparent for me was the relational trust and the rapport that exists amongst each of the students and their peers, but also with the teachers. And the teachers had really created a learning environment that allowed for them to be creative and share their experiences through story. And it was just absolutely powerful. And only this evening have I received my Christmas card from Cobargo Public School, which was emailed to me from Jill, the principal. And it's a YouTube clip of the kids jumping out of boxes with tinsel and yeah, it was actually quite joyous. It was 5 minutes before I joined the webinar that that I was watching this, and it's just really timely that you showcase and share that work that has been done by the students of Cobargo and the staff.
Beautiful. Thanks, Cathy. Well, in a moment, I'm going to invite you to make any closing comments, but I do want to just share with you something that's online here from Matt, where he's made the comment that educators around the state did an incredible job in creating a safe place for children and families and staff to reconnect immediately following the fires and to re-establish routines. In small remote communities, this need and the role that centres play is magnified. And he says Jodie at Rocky Hall is a great example of this. And I guess I just want to sort of bring this to a close with focus on the educators and the centres and the incredible job and the schools. But I think particularly early childhood settings because they have had a unique experience of the bushfires and then of COVID and have done the most incredible job and hopefully bringing educators in early childhood settings into a sharper focus around the sorts of needs that they have. And also that the educators have performed incredible roles, and we will fight on for wonderful educators and remuneration and for much more funding for early childhood settings. But I just did want to share that comment with you. So if I can invite any closing comments from any of you that you would like to share before we conclude this webinar, that would be fantastic. Cathy, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, look, I just want to echo the comments made by Matt. You know, collectively, I mean, I'll start by saying one of our former education ministers would often quote, "Never waste a crisis." And, you know, we can, you know, say that the 2019-2020 bushfires was definitely a crisis. For the entire nation, and it attracted attention globally. And we deserve to be proud of the inroads that we have individually and collectively made to ensure that the educational provision for our children in early childhood settings right through to higher education haven't been compromised in those communities that were impacted. You know, an example of the investment, and I just want to acknowledge the senior executive of the New South Wales Department of Education investing in establishing the Bushfire Relief Strategy Directorate that I'm privileged to lead. Now, that was this is a temporary directorate which was to come to a close at the end of August, but we have recognised that even though we have made some significant inroads, there is so much more work that needs to be done to ensure that we've got a systemic, sustained approach in responding and supporting recovery, as well as supporting the planning and preparedness as we embark each season. So that has been extended to August, and we really want to honour and uphold the integrity and the intent of the existence of the directorate in ensuring that we're meeting the needs of the education cluster in its entirety. So I invite people to reach out. I'm happy for my contact details, my email account, which is available to communicate, you know, what is it that is working? What else is it that we should perhaps give consideration to scaling more broadly? What is it that we need to give consideration to that we haven't what do we need to let go of? You know, it's that real seasonal approach in knowing what we keep, what we toss, what we need to consider, and the what else. And it's, you know, through the collective that we can achieve great things. So I really invite people to continue the conversation. And I just want to acknowledge the work of the University of Wollongong for investing in providing opportunities like Early Start for us to come together, connect and collaborate, because we can't underestimate the power of cross-fertilisation. So thank you.
Thanks, Cathy, and we'll share that email address so that people can respond to you. So thanks for that offering that. Kim, you've been amazing tonight, and I know you're a reluctant contributor, but you really wanted to do this. So thank you so much. Any closing comments from you?
Thank you for having me. I just want to thank, well, not really thank, but I think I'm thankful that we are a very small community, and we have we're part of the council, which is very supportive of not only the service that we work in, but also the community that we're a part of. So we are very lucky to be a part of this organisation, and the community is huge for them and for us. And I'm thankful that you guys even asked me to do this. Like, this was awesome.
I think you're my fan favourite.
Yeah.
I don't want brownie points. It's okay. Thank you guys for having me. It was huge. I was very nervous. And Mark, I think you're amazing. I just want to listen to you all night.
Well, then this is the time for Mark to have any closing comments.
Yeah, I
know, gosh. So I suppose what I'm aware of, like, there's in terms of mental health need, which is my territory, the Productivity Commission recognise that we need to get in early. And so it's really nice for me to reconnect. I work often with older kids, so it's really nice to connect with this space of early childhood, knowing that this is where you make a difference. And the other thing I always say to all the people that I'm involved in teaching here is, like, life is the best form of therapy. So, and what I'm aware of is that that's what you're like. It's through these mediums of preschools, schools, that life happens. And that's where the real therapy happens. Like, the odd person that has to end up seeing me, that's unlucky for them, really, because there's just been a few things that got on top of them. But I know that as soon as I can get them back out there to life, that it's all the great work that happens out there that really makes a difference. So it's a real treat for me to be part of this too. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Cathrine.
Thank you.
I think I want to jump on that moment of joy, but I do just want to echo Cathy's statement about the commitment at a systemic level, and also applaud the New South Wales Department of Education. I don't think I'm familiar with other efforts around the world that have really responded in such a systemic and committed way, and I think that's so important. But in saying that, I want to just lead on to yours and really think about, I think all the stories that have been shared tonight really highlight the power and the potential of the individual, and the power and the potential of the individual educator and teacher to shift children's pathways. And I think that's something that we need to hold on to and to celebrate. And I think that's been one of the gifts of what's experienced this year, is really the value and the essential nature of early childhood education and care in children's lives.
Wonderful. I think there's nothing more to say than thank you to you all for being here. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Kim. Thanks, Cathrine and Mark. Amazing insights that you've given us, and lots of comments here thanking you for those insights that you've given. And thank you to everybody who's been sharing this tonight. It's been fantastic to have you all on here. And thanks, of course, to all of the wonderful educators and to the early childhood settings across New South Wales and to the schools. And we'll say good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Leanne. Good night. Thanks again.
Thank you.